From the very first breath she took in a small, sun-baked town near the Arizona-Mexico border, Maria Castillo's life was a war fought in silence. She was the eldest daughter of a migrant worker family, and by the age of 6, she already knew the weight of a water jug and the sting of a sunburn that peeled in thick, white sheets. Her father, a man worn down by the desert and disappointment, had a temper that flared like a struck match. Her mother worked 2 shifts at a laundry service, leaving Maria to raise 3 younger siblings in a single wide trailer that smelled of damp cardboard and cheap beans. The world outside was just as hard. The dusty streets of her town had 2 paths for a girl like her: early marriage or factory work. But Maria had a third path, one she could not yet name. When she was 11, a neighbor's dog attacked her younger brother, Carlos. Without thinking, Maria grabbed a broken broomstick and charged the animal, driving it away with a ferocity that left her own forearm shredded and bleeding. The local sheriff, a man named Roy who had seen too many kids go missing or get hurt, drove her to the clinic. On the way, he said something that stuck in her like a splinter. He said, "You got the heart of a soldier, kid. Don't let this town waste it." That night, Maria stole a worn-out copy of a biography of a female combat pilot from the school library. She read it by flashlight under her blanket, the words filling her with a hunger she could not satisfy. By 14, Maria had become a ghost in her own home. Her father's drinking had worsened. He lost his landscaping job, and the family's trailer became a place of shouting and shoving. Her mother worked more and more, coming home with red eyes and cracked hands. Maria learned to cook, clean, and keep her siblings quiet when the fighting started. But the worst came when her father brought home a man named Hector, a coyote who ran people across the border. Hector had small, piggy eyes and a smile that never reached his face. He started showing up at the trailer every Friday, bringing cheap beer and a hungry look that Maria had learned to recognize. She began locking her bedroom door with a butter knife jammed into the latch. The night of the fire, Maria was 15. It was a dry October, and the Santa Ana winds were screaming down from the mountains. Her father was passed out on the couch. Her mother was at work. Maria was in her room, reading that same book again, when she smelled smoke. She ran out to find the kitchen on fire, a grease fire from a pan her father had left on the stove. The flames had already climbed the flimsy curtains and were licking the ceiling. She screamed for her father, but he was too drunk to wake. She dragged him off the couch, her small body shaking, and pulled him out the front door. Then she ran back in for her siblings, 2 younger sisters, and Carlos. She got them all out, one by one, coughing and crying. But just as she pulled Carlos through the door, a propane tank in the kitchen exploded. The fireball threw her 10 feet into the dirt. She felt the heat first, then the unbelievable pain. Her shirt had melted into the skin of her arms and chest. Her face, her beautiful 15-year-old face, was a mask of agony. Neighbors came running. Someone threw a wet blanket over her. She remembers staring up at the sky, seeing the stars blurred by tears and smoke, and hearing a sound she would never forget: the crackling of her own skin. The fire department came. An ambulance. But Hector had been watching from a truck across the street. While the paramedics were tending to her family, Hector walked up to the stretcher where Maria lay. She was barely conscious. He leaned down and whispered in her ear, "Your papa owes me money. Now you come with me." No one stopped him. In the chaos, with 3 other ambulances and police cars scattered around, Hector simply lifted the stretcher, rolled it into his truck, and drove away. Maria tried to scream, but her throat was scorched. The last thing she saw of her old life was her brother Carlos running after the truck, his small legs pumping, his mouth open in a scream she could not hear. For the next 2 years, Maria was a prisoner. Hector took her to a compound deep in the Sonoran Desert, a place made of shipping containers and chain-link fences. It was a staging point for human smuggling, but also a place for other things no one talked about. Maria was not the only captive. There were other girls, some younger, some older. All of them were scarred, bruised, or burned. Hector and his men called her La Quemada, the burned one. They thought her disfigurement was ugly, a curse. They made her sleep in a corner away from the others, and they never touched her the way they touched the other girls. In a twisted way, her burns saved her from the worst of it. But they also made her a target for cruelty. They threw cold water on her back to watch her writhe. They laughed at her when she tried to cover her face, but Maria refused to die. She refused to give up. The same fire that had scarred her skin had forged something unbreakable inside her. While the other girls wept and prayed, Maria watched. She learned the routines of her captors. She learned which guard slept deepest after drinking, which gate lock had a loose screw, and where the coyotes kept the satellite phone. She also learned to endure. The burns on her arms never fully healed, and the desert heat made them crack and bleed. She cleaned them with her own urine, the only sterile thing she had. She ate scraps from the garbage. She whispered to the other girls at night, in a voice as soft as ash, telling them to hold on. "We are not dead yet," she would say. "As long as we breathe, we have a chance." On the 731st night of her captivity, she got her chance. A new guard had been hired, a young man from Chihuahua who had a soft spot for his grandmother. He carried a photo of her in his wallet. Maria saw him looking at it one night and knew it was her opening. She pretended to be sick, coughing and moaning until the guard came to check on her. When he leaned over, she grabbed his head and slammed it against the metal wall of the container. He went down. She took his keys, his gun, and his wallet. Then she unlocked the gate. She led 7 other girls out into the desert night, barefoot, wearing only the rags on their backs. They walked for 3 days, hiding in ravines, drinking from cattle troughs, following the North Star. 2 of the girls gave up and turned back, too exhausted. Maria kept going. She carried a 12-year-old girl named Esperanza on her back for the last 12 miles. A Border Patrol helicopter spotted them just outside of Aya, Arizona. Maria was waving a torn piece of the guard's shirt like a white flag. She was so dehydrated that her lips had split open to her gums. But she was smiling. When the agents took her to a hospital, they asked her name. She said, "Maria Castilla. I was taken from my family 2 years ago. My father's name is Emilio. He owes Hector the coyote for $1,000. And I am not afraid to tell you everything." The story made national news for about 2 days. Then it faded, as news does. Her father had disappeared. Her mother had moved to Phoenix with Carlos and the other kids, remarried to a mechanic who was kind but quiet. Maria was reunited with them, but it was not a happy ending. Her mother cried when she saw Maria's scars. Her stepfather could not look at her. Her younger sisters were afraid. Carlos, now a tall 14-year-old, was the only one who hugged her and did not let go. But the silence in the house was heavy. Maria could not sleep indoors. She would wake up screaming, clawing at her skin, thinking the fire was back. She dropped out of school. She spent her days walking the desert trails near her mother's house, her eyes always scanning the horizon. Her body always ready to run. She was 19 when she saw a recruiting poster for the United States Navy. It had a picture of a helicopter flying over the ocean. And the words, "Accelerate your life." Something clicked in her chest. She walked into the recruiting office the next day, her scars visible under a long-sleeved shirt. The recruiter, a senior chief named Miller, took one look at her medical file and started shaking his head. "Burns over 30% of your body. Multiple fractures from your captivity. Psychological trauma. Kid, you won't even make it through basic training." Maria did not argue. She simply pulled up her sleeves, showed him the mottled, twisted skin on her arms, and said, "I spent 2 years in a shipping container. I walked 3 days through the desert with no water. I carried a child on my back. Your basic training is 3 months. Tell me again what I cannot do." Senior Chief Miller stared at her for a long moment. Then he laughed, a loud, barking sound. "All right, Castilla. Let's see what you've got." She went to Great Lakes Naval Training Center in the dead of winter. The cold made her scars ache, but she did not complain. The drill instructors yelled. She did not flinch. They made her run, swim, climb, and crawl. She was not the fastest, not the strongest, but she was the one who never stopped. When other recruits cried, she pulled them up. When they wanted to quit, she sat with them and told them the same words she had whispered in that desert container. "As long as we breathe, we have a chance." Her lead drill instructor, a gunnery sergeant whose voice could crack concrete, pulled her aside after the final exercise. He said, "Castilla, I've been doing this for 20 years. I have never seen anyone like you. You don't just survive. You make everyone around you better." She graduated top of her class. Not in academics, not in athletics, but in the one thing the Navy could not teach: resilience. After boot camp, Maria chose a path that surprised everyone. She did not want a desk job. She did not want to be a supply clerk or a technician. She wanted to be a naval special warfare combatant craft crewman, the people who drive the boats that deliver Navy SEALs to their missions. It was a male-dominated field, physically brutal, and almost no women had done it. But Maria did not care about statistics. She cared about one thing. She wanted to be near the men who hunted men like Hector. She had read about SEALs in that book under her blanket as a child. Now, she learned that they were real, and they were the ones who went after human traffickers, cartel bosses, and the worst of the worst. She wanted to help them. She wanted to be useful to the monsters that killed monsters. She made it through the crewman training, which included close-quarters combat, maritime navigation, and survival in freezing water. Her scars turned a deeper purple in the cold, but she kept going. Then she applied for a position that had never been held by a woman, a trainer at the Naval Special Warfare Center in Coronado, California. Specifically, she wanted to be an instructor for the infamous Hell Week, the 5.5-day crucible where SEAL candidates are pushed to the absolute limit of human endurance. The commanding officer at the time, a captain named Halsey, looked at her file, looked at her scars, and asked, "Why?" Maria said, "Because those men need to know what real suffering looks like. They need to see someone who has been through actual fire, not just simulated pain. And they need to understand that survival is not about being the strongest. It's about being the one who refuses to die." Captain Halsey approved her request with a single condition: she had to pass the same physical screening as every other SEAL instructor. She did. On a cold Monday morning in March, Maria Castilla walked onto the Grinder, a blacktop training area on the beach, wearing the same green t-shirt and khaki shorts as the other instructors. Her scars were on full display. The SEAL candidates, 120 of the fittest, toughest young men in the military, stared at her. Some snickered. Others whispered. They had never seen a woman instructor, let alone one with burn scars covering her arms and neck. She heard one of them say, "Who's the crispy critter?" She did not react. She simply stood at attention, her eyes cold and flat as the Pacific Ocean behind her. Then the training began. The first exercise of Hell Week was always the same: the break in evolution on the Grinder. The candidates, already sleep-deprived and half-frozen from being hosed down with Pacific Ocean water, had to perform calisthenics until their muscles screamed. The instructors circled them like wolves, barking corrections, pouring more cold water, and throwing sand in their faces. But Maria did not bark. She stood in front of her assigned boat crew, 6 candidates who had drawn the short straw, and simply watched. Her silence was more terrifying than any scream. One of the candidates, a massive former college linebacker named Kowalski, tried to show off by doing extra push-ups. Maria walked over, knelt down, and looked him in the eye. Her voice was low and calm. "You're wasting energy. This is not a competition. This is a test of whether you can keep going when your body tells you to stop. If you want to impress me, save your strength for the 4th day." That's when most men quit. The first 24 hours were brutal. The candidates ran, swam, carried heavy inflatable boats over their heads, and crawled through mudflats. They were allowed no sleep, no warm food, and no dry clothing. By the 30-hour mark, 4 candidates had already quit, ringing the brass bell that sat on the beach, a ritual that signified failure. Maria's crew was down to 5. One of them, a young man named Petty Officer Davis, had a stress fracture in his foot. He was limping badly, but he refused to quit. During a 4-mile beach run, Davis fell behind. Maria dropped back to run beside him. "You don't have to be the fastest," she said. "You just have to finish. Can you finish?" Davis nodded, tears of pain and exhaustion streaming down his face. Maria put her hand on his shoulder and jogged with him for the next 2 miles, matching his hobbled pace. They were the last pair to cross the finish line, but they crossed it together. The other instructors looked at Maria with new respect. By the end of the 2nd day, the candidates were hallucinating from lack of sleep. They saw faces in the sand, heard voices in the wind. One candidate started crying uncontrollably, saying that his dead grandmother was calling him from the water. Another fell asleep standing up and collapsed like a puppet with cut strings. Maria's job was to identify the ones who were truly broken and the ones who just needed a push. She had a gift for it, honed by 2 years of watching men like Hector. She could see the difference between physical exhaustion and spiritual surrender. She would walk up to a candidate who was sitting in the surf, head in his hands, and she would not yell. She would sit down next to him, her own scarred body shivering in the cold, and she would say, "I was burned over 30% of my body when I was 15. I was held captive by coyotes for 2 years. I watched a child die of dehydration in my arms. And I am still here. You have been awake for 48 hours. You are cold and you are tired, but you are not dying. So get up." 9 times out of 10, the candidate got up. That was Maria's magic. She did not shame them. She did not threaten them. She simply showed them that she had survived worse, and that ordinary suffering was a privilege. The one time a candidate did not get up, a quiet kid from Ohio named Thompson, who had lost 20 pounds in 2 days, Maria did something unprecedented. She carried him. Not literally, not the whole way, but she stayed with him for 6 hours, talking to him about his family, his dog, his favorite fishing spot. She reminded him of who he was outside of this pain. By the morning of the 3rd day, Thompson was back on his feet, running with his boat crew. He would later graduate BUD AS and become a SEAL. In his graduation letter, he wrote, "Instructor Castilia did not teach me how to be tough. She taught me that being tough is just refusing to forget why you started." The worst moment came on the 4th night. It was 2 in the morning, and a storm had rolled in off the ocean. The wind was blowing at 40 miles an hour, and the rain was horizontal. The candidates had to paddle their inflatable boats a mile out to a buoy and back. Hypothermia was a real danger. Maria's boat crew was down to 3 men, Kowalski, Davis with the stress fracture, and a wiry former ranch hand named Ortiz. The waves were 8 feet high, and the cold was a living thing, wrapping around their chests like iron bands. Halfway to the buoy, their boat capsized. The candidates were thrown into the black, churning water. Maria, who was following in a safety boat, did not hesitate. She dove in. The water was 53 degrees. Her scars pulled tight as the cold hit her. She swam to Kowalski first, who was panicking, his massive arms flailing. She grabbed him by the back of his life vest and screamed in his ear, "You are not dying tonight. Flip the boat, now." Kowalski, shocked into obedience, grabbed the side of the boat and flipped it over. Then Maria found Davis, whose stress fracture had snapped completely in the chaos. He was screaming in pain, barely able to stay afloat. Maria put his arm around her shoulder and kicked for the boat. Ortiz, the ranch hand, pulled them both in. They made it back to shore. Davis was medevac to a hospital. He would not become a SEAL, but he would later say, "Instructor Castilia saved my life. I was 10 seconds from letting go." And she showed up. That night, after the candidates were finally given 1 hour of sleep, the other instructors gathered around Maria in the team room. The lead instructor, a Master Chief with more than 20 years of combat experience, looked at her and said, "I've been doing Hell Week for 15 years. I've seen SEALs break. I've seen instructors break. I have never seen anyone dive into 53-degree water to save a candidate. You are not just an instructor. You are the standard." But the hardest test was yet to come. And it had nothing to do with the Navy on the 5th and final day of Hell Week. As the sun rose over Coronado Beach, Maria received a message from the base security office. A man had been spotted on the public beach, taking photographs of the training area. When the security team approached him, he ran. They caught him and found that he was carrying a Mexican driver's license and a list of names. One of those names was Maria Castilia. Her old life had found her. Hector, the coyote who had taken her, was now a lieutenant for a Sinaloa cartel cell operating in Baja California. He had never forgotten the girl who escaped. He had been looking for her for years. And now, through connections in the military town of Coronado, he had discovered that La Quemada was not just a survivor, but an instructor for the very men who were hunting him. The Navy offered Maria protection. They could move her to a different base, change her identity, put her behind a desk in Virginia. She refused. "I am not running again," she said. "I ran through the desert once." That was enough. She requested to be placed on a training mission to a secret location in the desert southwest Amak village used for counter-terrorism drills. Her request was granted. What no one knew, except for a small team of SEALs, was that the training mission had a second objective. Intelligence had tracked Hector to a compound 50 miles south of the border, a location almost identical to the shipping container prison where Maria had been held.